He ridiculed a 17-year-old girl right in front of everyone in the garage. Then he stood silently, shocked, as she repaired the engine that no one else dared to touch. "Tell your daughter to stay out of the way. This is not a classroom." That was the very first thing Wesley Travis said to Donovan Martin. No greeting, no handshake, just those words, spoken loudly enough for the whole crew to hear. Donovan remained unfazed. He had worked for enough arrogant bosses to understand when it was best to stay calm. However, his daughter Julia overheard every single word. She caught it all but did not respond, or even lift her eyes from the rusty Aston Martin 512 parked close to Bay 3. She had come to spend time with her father, maybe to get some hands-on experience with a rare engine, not to become a target. The garage was spacious, featuring glass walls and shiny concrete floors, located down a quiet street in Tempe, Arizona, where the desert heat made even the shaded areas feel warm. Donovan had been with Travis Automotive Restorations for over 5 years, and was known as a man capable of rebuilding a carburetor effortlessly. Yet the new boss showed no interest in that reputation. Wesley Travis had taken over from his father 2 months earlier, and made it clear from day one that he desired a fresh atmosphere. By fresh atmosphere, he meant fewer experienced mechanics around, and absolutely no girls allowed in the garage. That particular Saturday morning began slowly, with Donovan tightening a timing belt while Julia wandered nearby, wiping her hands on a shop rag. She had been observing a group of mechanics debating over a V12 engine that had not started for several weeks. "I believe that sensor is connected the wrong way," she muttered quietly. The laughter erupted swiftly and loudly. One of the men, slim with a baseball cap worn backwards, smiled broadly. "Looks like we have a technician among us," he remarked. Another chimed in. "Now she wants to teach us how to fix the Ferrari, too." Donovan glanced over, his mouth opening to respond. But before he could speak, Wesley Travis stepped forward, a genuine smile radiating from him. He declared, "Let's give her a chance." The workshop fell silent. "Are you serious?" one of the crew asked. Travis nodded. "Let's see what the prodigy can do. You think that sensor is faulty? Great. Go ahead and fix it. If you are right, I will personally scrub the shop floor with a toothbrush." He was teasing, or perhaps not. Either way, he felt like he had won their respect. Julia looked at her father. Donovan was watching her hesitantly. He trusted his daughter's abilities as she had been assisting him since she was old enough to hold a socket wrench. But this was not their home garage. This was different. "You do not have to," he murmured. "I know," she replied confidently, then moved toward the Ferrari. Everyone stepped aside as she pulled her long braids to one side, grabbed a pair of gloves from the rack, and lifted the hood. The car let out a soft hiss as it opened, revealing the disorganized, half-rebuilt engine beneath. Tubes, wires, engine mounts. It resembled a labyrinth constructed to bewilder anyone approaching it. "You might want to have her watch a YouTube tutorial first," someone whispered, while another mechanic chuckled softly. Wesley Travis folded his arms and leaned against a post. "Take your time," he said. "We have only spent 3 weeks on that machine." Julia remained silent, leaning in close, her eyes methodically scanning every detail with a calm intensity that made others uneasy. It was more than just confidence, it was deep, unwavering focus. She carefully moved wires aside, examined the mounts, and lightly pressed on various connections to test their reliability. "What exactly do you believe you are doing?" Travis asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her reply was barely audible. This piece has been handled by too many people. Someone rerouted your ignition feed incorrectly. The sensor thinks it's getting 12 volts, but it is only receiving about 8. That caught everyone's attention. One of the older mechanics raised an eyebrow. "She is probably right," he murmured. Another added a comment, yet Julia didn't even show the slightest reaction. Donovan Martin stepped closer but stayed silent. Julia then delicately removed the main harness from its socket, turned on the flashlight on her phone, and bent down to follow the wire's path. "She means business," someone whispered. Travis's expression shifted just slightly. "All right, genius. If you believe you have the solution, you have 20 minutes. Julia stood up and said, "I will not need that long." But Travis had no idea what kind of challenge he had just brought into his shop. The atmosphere changed noticeably, even without a word, the moment Julia declared she wouldn't need 20 minutes. A silence fell over the garage. It was not respect yet, just a building tension. A few brows furrowed, some arms folded. Now they were watching, not merely mocking. Julia kept her gaze fixed on the engine. The Ferrari's V12 was not only complicated, it was precise. European imports like this one demanded exactness. One slip in rewiring, one sensor misunderstood, and you would waste hours chasing after your own mistakes. She calmly asked, "Can someone hand me a T15? Nobody moved at first. Then a tool clinked down on the metal table close by. It was Rick, short and wiry, always chewing gum and usually the loudest in the room. He had joked earlier, but now he was watching her in a new way. "I want to see where this goes," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. Julia accepted the screwdriver without a word of thanks, not from rudeness, but because her mind was already in the wiring harness. Her actions were quick yet precise, no fumbling or hesitation. Wesley Travis leaned against a hydraulic lift, crossing his arms like a judge in a courtroom. He said, "If you touch the wrong wire, that car goes into lockout. Short it, and you are looking at $20,000 for fried sensors." Julia did not even glance at him. "Maybe that is why you should have studied the diagram," she replied sharply. That line hit harder than any wrench could. Rick let out a startled snort, which he quickly muffled. Donovan Martin remained still, neither smiling nor frowning. However, his hands were clenched in front of him, as if keeping them together stopped him from intervening. Julia unplugged the faulty connector and blew off a fine layer of dust. She started examining the pins carefully. The engine compartment was cramped, a kind of tight space where even skilled technicians found it challenging. Yet Julia handled it effortlessly, moving with a natural flow as if she anticipated every step, always thinking 3 moves ahead. From her backpack, she pulled out a small multimeter, her own tool, not borrowed from anyone. She clipped it onto the leads with precision. Rick cocked his head in curiosity, wondering where she had learned all these skills. Donovan finally broke the silence, explaining it was her home garage. She had been tinkering with engines since childhood. No one had thought to share this information with the rest of them. She was practically a walking manual for repairs, someone added. Donovan just shrugged, saying he hadn't seen it as important. The tense atmosphere was easing, but only slightly. What took its place was not relaxation, but intrigue. Even those who had previously rolled their eyes started inching closer, peering over shoulders, watching her movements as attentively as if they were tuning forks. Wesley Travis approached her deliberately, his voice cutting through the room. He made it clear that if she messed this up, she alone would be accountable. Julia didn't even glance at him as she replied confidently, "If I fix it, do you take full responsibility for wasting 3 weeks?" That remark landed hard. Rick actually chuckled out loud this time, while Wesley's expression tightened. "We will see," he said with restrained tension. Julia then asked in a calm, straightforward tone, "Have you ever considered that maybe the fault was not in the machine?" She wasn't being sarcastic, merely stating a fact. Gently, she turned the connector into the correct position and fastened it with a new clip. Without any flourish, she stood upright and rubbed her hands together. There was grease smeared across her wrist and a faint streak on her cheek. She didn't mind. Now the meter showed 9.8 volts. Still low, but steady. Rick blinked, surprised. "How did you reverse the current flow from the secondary relay?" he asked. She replied plainly that the system was starving itself of power. Those words might have sounded meaningless to the non-technical people in the room, but for the ones familiar with wiring, everything clicked perfectly. Someone whispered, "I never even thought to check that." A mechanic in his 40s leaned on a bench, eyes fixed intently. "I rewired that relay," he confessed. "Yeah," Julia said softly. "And it's not your fault. This setup is flipped compared to most models. Easy to overlook the first time." The room held no sarcasm, only quiet determination. Julia then called out calmly, "I need one more thing. Can someone turn the ignition key but don't try to start it?" Donovan was the first to move, sliding into the driver's seat. "Give me a second," he said. Moments later, the dashboard lit up, clear, with no error codes. "Wow," Rick muttered, as everyone leaned forward in surprise. "Wait," Julia warned. Yet none of them could predict what was about to unfold. The garage fell completely silent. Not tense, not mocking, just utterly still. All eyes were fixed on Julia as she bent back under the hood. "All right," she said. "Now that the relays are configured correctly, I need to reprogram the idle settings. Your ECU is still on factory defaults, which don't sync with the airflow modifications." Someone asked softly, "Who told her about the airflow mods?" Another person muttered, "She figured it out." Julia gave no response. She was already plugging in a cable into the diagnostic port and launching a simple app on her phone. It was nothing flashy or decorated with logos, just streams of numbers and raw data. She started scrolling through adjustment options like someone reading sheet music. "You can reprogram that from your phone?" Rick asked remotely. "Yeah," she replied without looking up. "It's not perfect, but definitely quicker." Wesley Travis scoffed as he paced behind her. "We had trained technicians with full laptop setups try exactly that, and it didn't work at all." "They weren't interpreting the correction table correctly," Julia explained calmly. "They forced a throttle offset without recalibrating the air-to-fuel ratio." Travis blinked, silent this time, unsure what to say. Julia went on, "I'm going to reset the idle slope to 7.2, then reduce the cold start injection delay by 2 seconds. She tapped a button. The dashboard lights flickered briefly. Donovan Martin looked up from the steering wheel. "No warning lights," he said. "Try to start it now," she called. He turned the key. The engine churned, whined, then stalled again. The noise was stronger, almost responsive, but still wouldn't ignite. Someone at the back said, "Almost there." Julia frowned, not irritated but deep in thought about the secondary coil. She murmured, "It's misaligned." "Are you sure?" Donovan asked. "No," she admitted. "But I'm not leaving it like this." She walked over to the bay, grabbed a small socket, and approached the car. The mechanic stepped aside, no longer laughing or asking questions. Giving her space, she opened the ignition housing, adjusted the coil's position, and tightened it delicately. Her fingers moved swiftly and confidently. Each action was the result of honed muscle memory. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. It was not flamboyant, but exact. What is she even doing now? Wesley Travis asked quietly to himself more than anyone else. Fixing what we missed, Rick responded. She nodded at her father to try again. He turned the key, and this time the Ferrari did not just sputter. It emitted a deep, raw rumble that gradually grew into a strong rhythm. The whole garage seemed to tremble as the V12 engine roared to life, idling low and fierce like a wild creature just awakened after a long rest. Everyone stood frozen. Wesley Travis gazed as if confronted by a ghost. Rick stepped forward carefully, eyes wide in disbelief. "That thing hasn't made a sound in 24 days, he said. Julia did not smile. Instead, she faced Travis. "You wanted it to run? It is running." He remained silent. Another mechanic bent down to inspect the display. "Throttle response is smooth, temperature's stable. Check the air-fuel ratio," Julia said. "It's at 12.7. It's spot on now." The workshop buzzed, but differently than before. Mechanics whispered, shook their heads, some even grinned. Not at her, but at the fact that something had finally worked. Travis did not look pleased, but stunned, as if confronted with a truth spoken in a language he never cared to learn. Donovan Martin stepped out of the car, paused, staring at the engine. He finally turned to her. "I never even taught you that coil trick." "You did," she said quietly. "You just did not realize I was watching." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You are always watching." Someone clapped from the back of the room. A slow single clap. Then another joined. It was not loud or dramatic like in the movies, just genuine applause from people who were honestly surprised. Wesley Travis spoke up at last. "That does not mean you are some kind of expert." "I never said I was," Julia replied calmly. "You were the one who turned it into a dare." But there was more she kept silent about. Things that would make their eyebrows raise even higher. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The engine hummed softly behind Julia as if it had been waiting for her this entire time. But she did not glance at it. Her gaze stayed fixed on Wesley. The garage owner cleared his throat, as if trying to regain control of the situation. "Fixing one engine does not mean you really understand what you are doing." No one laughed this time, no amusement in the room. Donovan Martin stepped forward, voice low but cutting. "You challenged her, Wes," she answered. "Yes." "Well," Travis muttered, straightening his shirt cuffs. "Maybe she just got lucky." "Luck does not rewire relays or reprogram ECUs," Rick said firmly. "You all saw it. We all saw it." Wesley's jaw tightened as he realized he was losing control of the crowd. He glanced around, searching for someone to support him. But the faces staring back showed little eagerness anymore. Julia did not bother defending herself. She was not here for praise. She unplugged her phone from the diagnostic port and wiped her hands again. "I was not trying to prove anything," she said. "You put me on the spot. I just did not want my dad to look bad." That comment hit harder than she had intended. Donovan glanced at her, not surprised. Just quietly proud, like dads sometimes are when words are unnecessary. Rick crossed his arms and stared at Travis. She is the first person in this garage who did not overanalyze that engine. She simply noticed the problem and fixed it. Yeah, said another mechanic, an older man with oil-stained boots and a constant squint. I have been working for 30 years, and I missed the exact thing she spotted in 15 minutes. Travis tried to downplay it. Okay, she has a keen eye, but that does not mean she is trained. I did not say she was, Julia replied. But neither were half the guys you hired. That point was sharp, and silence returned. It was tense, then reflective. Donovan gave a single nod. She has been helping me rebuild engines in the backyard for years. At first I thought it was just a hobby, but then she began fixing things I did not even realize were broken. Rick asked, "Wait, how long has she been doing this?" Julia looked up. "Since I was 12. Someone let out a quiet whistle. Travis faced her again, this time with a softer tone. "So, you are saying you are self-taught?" "I watched my dad ask questions, took things apart, put them back together, made many mistakes. I learned more from that than anything else." Another mechanic chuckled. "That is how most of us learned. She is one of us, whether you accept it or not." Travis did not reply, but his expression said everything. This was not how he imagined the day unfolding, not in the slightest. The engine behind them kept its steady beat, loud yet smooth, vibrant with life. Julia turned away from Wesley Travis and faced the bay once more, giving the engine a final inspection. "You will still want to change the oil before running it for too long. Sitting unused that long probably ruined the viscosity." Rick laughed and admitted she was right. Then someone raised a question that had been lingering since the engine first started. "Have you ever thought about doing this for real?" Julia blinked, unsure. "What do you mean, like making it a full-time job? There are shops that would pay for hands like yours." Donovan Martin looked at her, curious about her answer. Jeremiah shrugged. "Maybe I just enjoy building things. I like it when broken stuff finally starts working." Rick commented, "You're talented." Wesley muttered something under his breath, but no one pressed him for it. Just then, a younger mechanic named Victor pointed across the room. "You didn't bring a laptop. You fixed that with your phone. What else do you have in that backpack?" Julia gave a small smile. "A tablet, 2 diagnostic apps, an old coil I've been rewiring, and some sandwiches." The room burst into genuine laughter, not sarcasm or disbelief. But before they could relax, Julia was about to say something that would change their perception of her entirely. Rick leaned on the workbench, still chuckling. "Sandwiches too? You really came prepared." Julia gave a quiet smirk, but she remained mostly silent. Her attention was fixed on the engine, her thoughts running through every possible factor, every hidden defect. Her gaze did not simply observe a machine, it perceived a dialogue, a pattern. At this moment, the engine was communicating clearly with her. Victor moved closer, peering into the engine compartment as if it had suddenly sprouted wings. "I have never seen this thing idle so smoothly. The previous mechanic said the timing chain might have slipped." "No," Julia responded. "The timing was perfect. It just did not know when to breathe." Rick glanced at Donovan and said, "You must be really proud." Donovan looked at his daughter, nodding gently. "I have always been proud, but this accomplishment belongs to her." The atmosphere was gradually warming toward her, like cold metal thawing. But Wesley Travis was not finished. He took a step forward, cleared his throat, that tight grin tugging at his mouth corner as he tried to regain command. "All right, impressive," he admitted. "But I have seen glimpses of talent before. That does not mean she is ready for what is truly coming." Julia faced him and said, "You think this was not real?" He just shrugged. One good job does not prove much over time. Rick interrupted, "Come on, man. We have been struggling for weeks." She walks in, examines, and gets it running. That is not luck, it is skill. Whatever Wesley Travis muttered, let us not pretend she is Einstein. Julia moved around the car and pulled a creased envelope from her bag, already stained with grease. She handed it to Rick, who raised an eyebrow, opened it slowly, and let out a quiet whistle. "No way, what?" another mechanic asked, and Wesley Travis flipped the letter over. It bore the Massachusetts Institute of Technology letterhead at the top, and a distinct line across the middle of the page. A full academic scholarship was awarded based on an evaluation in mechanical engineering and an independent project submission. Victor's jaw dropped. "You got accepted into MIT." Julia nodded and said they offered the scholarship last month. "I submitted a design for a modular combustion engine that produced 30% less waste. I built the prototype using scrap materials." For once, the garage was silent. Even the engine idle was quieter than before. Wesley examined the letter, his eyes scanning it, but he remained silent. "You submitted that when you were 17, Rick asked. Julia nodded again and added that she used parts left behind by her father's customers. One of the older men rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So you created your own engine in your spare time?" "In your backyard, yes." Rick held up the letter as if it was proof of some long-standing myth. "Why didn't you start with this?" Julia shrugged slightly. "I didn't think it was necessary." The whole garage felt different now. The disbelief was breaking. Some looked sheepish, others were clearly impressed. Wesley looked like someone who had bet against the winning side and just realized his mistake. Donovan Martin stepped forward once more. "She isn't trying to prove anything. She is simply following her passion." Rick approached Wesley, shaking his head. "She's more qualified than half of us, and none of us saw it coming." Wesley tried to dismiss it. "That still does not mean she is ready to handle the pressure." "She felt the pressure," Rick said sharply. "You turned this into a challenge, and she transformed it into a lesson." The engine hummed steadily, warm and calm, standing in stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. Wesley Travis could no longer conceal his emotions. Victor smiled widely and remarked, "If MIT is already reaching out to her, I am eager to see where she will be in 5 years. She is already ahead of many college graduates." Rick chimed in. Donovan Martin looked at his daughter and asked, "Want to share what you have been up to on weekends?" Julia hesitated briefly, then shrugged. "Fixing lawnmowers, rebuilding go-karts, some freelance programming," she replied. Victor blinked in surprise. "I created my own scan tool," she added, "having developed the software entirely on my own." The room filled with low whistles and murmurs once more. There was no denying it any longer. This young woman was not just an extraordinary talent. She was something exceptional. Most of them had never anticipated her arrival. Yet the respect was not the only thing shifting. A few of these men started to look within themselves in ways they had not for many years. Wesley Travis stood with his arms crossed, but the confidence he had earlier was fading. He observed Julia the way one watches a storm, expecting it to pass by, but then realizing it has settled directly above them. She never glanced at him again, nor did she need to. Her achievements had already spoken far louder than any words ever could. Finally, a mechanic named Rick, a quiet man in his mid-40s who had witnessed countless apprentices come and go, broke the silence. You are going to succeed out there, not only because you are intelligent, because you remained composed when everyone else doubted you. Julia did not reply immediately. She glanced down at her hands, still greasy on the knuckles. I have grown accustomed to it. Rick frowned. To being underestimated, she said, looking at me as if I was meant to stay unnoticed, silent, and avoid taking up too much space. Rick moved closer, wiping his hands with a shop towel. They treat everyone like that eventually. Maybe, she responded, but not in this way. And that stopped him. Not because he did not understand, but because he did. Wesley Travis scoffed softly. You are turning this into something it is not. Julia finally met his gaze. No, you did that when you turned my father into a laughingstock just for bringing me here. Donovan Martin shifted beside her, not in defense but simply present. She did not require protection, but he would always stand behind her. Rick muttered, She has a point. Victor added, Wes, she never asked for this. You made it into a spectacle, and now you are upset the ending is not yours. The tension eased just a little. Wesley looked down, his jaw clenched, yet he knew that arguing now would only worsen things. Rick leaned on a tool cart. You know, when I first started here, I had a foreman who said, You do not learn anything from the people who think they know everything. You learn from those who keep asking questions. She asked the right ones. Julia gave a small nod of gratitude. Rick laughed. I remember when I thought I was something special just for fixing an automatic transmission with nothing but a flashlight and a prayer. She was out there programming electronic control units and assembling engines as if she was at summer camp, someone else commented. Not once did she show off, which is rare, and Julia was not seeking admiration. Yet, now that respect was present, it felt genuine and well-deserved. Donovan turned to her again with pride clearly visible on his face. You have been quiet all your life, but when something is broken, you make yourself heard. Julia smiled softly. Rick looked at her thoughtfully, seemingly deep in contemplation. You know, we talk about respect here all the time, but we do not always give it to the right people. That changes today, he declared. Even Wesley Travis did not argue. He remained silent, eyes cast downward. Rick continued. Let's be honest. If she wanted to walk in here tomorrow and work alongside us, she could. She would hold her own better than many guys we have seen come and go. She is not coming back, Donovan stated firmly. She has bigger things in store. Those words lingered in the air for a moment as the engine hummed again, perfectly tuned. Victor chuckled softly, still amazed. I am still amazed that she fixed it with just a phone and a backpack. Julia glanced around the room. You guys are skilled at what you do, but you get used to doing things one way. Sometimes the problem is not the engine but the way you were taught to see it. That hit hard. No one laughed or joked, just quiet understanding. Rick clapped his hands once, breaking the silence. All right, let's shut it down before it wastes any more fuel. Donovan leaned forward and switched off the ignition. The engine let out a gentle click, gradually cooling in the quiet. Julia stepped back, peeling off her gloves. "Thanks for letting me handle it," she said softly, not directing the words at anyone in particular. Victor smiled broadly. "No problem. Thanks for showing us what we missed." Before anyone could inquire about her next move, she made it evident she had no plans to slow down. Rick leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, biting the inside of his cheek. "So what's your next step?" he asked. Julia paused, the workshop lights humming quietly overhead, and the air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. Her gaze swept the room, not just landing on the car she had revived, but on the men who had been watching her work. Some still looked stunned, others appeared a bit uneasy, but all were noticeably different from when she first entered. "I am graduating in a few months," she said firmly. "Then I will go to Cambridge for a summer program before the fall semester." Victor nodded approvingly. "MIT is lucky to have you," he said. She smiled faintly, tired but genuine. "I used to think I had to prove I belonged in places like that. But now—" Rick interrupted. "What now, Julia?" She met his eyes steadily. "Now I know I do, no matter what anyone else thinks." Rick whistled softly. "That right there is why she's going to succeed." Donovan, standing beside her with his arms finally relaxed after the morning, shrugged. "Tried to tell you all," he said. "Julia has been ahead of the game since she was 15, rebuilding transmissions just for fun." Wesley Travis cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. He acknowledged her talent, his voice quieter now with no room for doubt. It was not exactly a compliment, but it was also not a rejection. Julia gave a single nod as a sign of gratitude. Wesley Travis glanced first at Donovan Martin and then at her. He said, "If you ever want to work at a shop after school or something, just let me know, there is an opening." That remark surprised a few of the guys. Donovan stayed silent, his gaze fixed on his daughter instead. Julia responded with a brief thanks, but mentioned she had other plans. There was no hint of arrogance, simply honesty. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Rick nodded in approval while Victor chuckled softly, saying, "You cannot blame her. Shops like this are not always the easiest environments to grow in." Julia turned toward her father, asking if they were ready to leave. He answered yes while grabbing a towel to dry his hands. He suggested beating the heat before temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. As they made their way toward the garage doors, Rick caught up with them, calling out, "Hey, before you go." They paused, and Rick raised his hand as if about to offer some profound advice, but then lowered it again, saying, "Just do not forget about us when you are busy building rocket ships or whatever." Julia smiled, replying, "If you can repair a Ferrari, you do not forget the garage." Victor shouted from behind Rick, saying, "You are a mechanic, Julia, no matter what degree you might earn." She hesitated at the threshold, then said, "Maybe, but I believe I am something else as well." Rick asked what she meant. Julia answered that she was a builder of engines and ideas, possibly also someone who could create better ways to treat people. That thought lingered in the air with quiet sincerity rather than preaching. Donovan opened the passenger door for her out of old habit. She slid inside with her backpack resting across her chest. A letter from MIT peeked slightly out from the zipper. As Donovan Martin started the truck, the deep sound of the V12 engine lingered faintly behind them. Silence stretched for several minutes before he finally asked, "Do you think they will treat the next girl differently?" Julia reclined in her seat and replied, "I believe some of them will, and the rest, they will learn." Even as the truck drove away, what they had left behind in that workshop was far more than just a fixed engine. It served as a reflection, revealing to every man there something they had not expected to confront. By the following Monday, the garage atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The typical morning chatter was softer, more careful. No one brought up scores from football games, and playful teasing was absent. Everyone sensed a change, though many couldn't quite put their finger on what exactly had altered. Rick was the first to voice the unspoken. Leaning over the hood of a 1972 Mustang in mid-morning, he looked up at Victor and said, "I can't stop thinking about Saturday." Without taking his eyes off the carburetor, Victor nodded in agreement. "Right. She made us all seem kind, rigid, didn't she?" "No," Victor corrected him. "She made us look like we had stopped growing." The truth hung in the air between two men who were accustomed to being the most knowledgeable around, especially when it came to machines. Rick was passing by with a torque wrench when he caught the end of their conversation. "She didn't shame us," he added thoughtfully. "She revealed how far we could still push ourselves." Even Wesley Travis had been unusually quiet since the event. That morning, he entered without barking orders or hovering over the younger mechanics as he normally did. He paced around the room more slowly, pausing occasionally to glance at the Ferrari, now fully restored with its cover pulled back just enough to remind everyone it had not been neglected. Although he would never confess it openly, he had stayed late into Sunday night, analyzing the diagnostic reports she had produced. The data was clear, the programming flawless, the repair precise. She was not simply lucky, she genuinely understood her craft. Meanwhile, in Bay 2, Rick grabbed a rag to clean his hands and said, "You know, I was always told this job is about doing the same task repeatedly, practicing until your hands remember the motions." However, observing her, he realized she did more than repeat steps mechanically. Every action seemed intentional and deliberate. Victor chuckled quietly to himself, admitting it made him see how complacent he had become with quick and easy fixes. It was not a moment of shame, but rather one of sincere self-reflection, something rare in their world where noise often drowned out truth. Leaning against the nearby wall, Rick shared what impressed him most. She was not out to prove anyone wrong. She merely wanted to avoid embarrassing her father. This sentiment earned several nods, including from Jamir, the youngest technician fresh out of trade school, who lifted his eyes from his notes. He noted, "She is probably younger than me, and here I am trying to figure out how to reset a throttle body by searching online." Rick laughed. "We all do that. No need to be hard on yourself," but added that she moved as if it were second nature. Jamir agreed, saying it seemed like part of who she was. Later that day, Wesley Travis called Donovan Martin into his office. There were no threats or warnings, just a calm invitation to talk. Donovan stepped inside without hesitation. He wiped his boots before stepping inside. As usual, he sat down without being invited. "I was mistaken," Wesley Travis said, avoiding eye contact. Donovan Martin remained still. "I should not have confronted her like that. Nor should I have challenged you," Wesley continued. "She is sharp, probably sharper than anyone I know under 30. Donovan gave a brief nod. "She is," he agreed. Wesley exhaled deeply. "You raised her well. You did not teach her how to repair engines. That skill came naturally to her." "I recognize talent when I see it," Wesley admitted. "And she definitely has it." Donovan stood up, adding, She possesses more than just talent. She has patience and a kind of concentration that is not driven by wanting to impress others. Wesley leaned back in his chair. Do you think she will ever come back here? No, Donovan replied quietly. But that is not really the point, is it? Wesley shook his head slowly. No, it is not. Outside the office, Rick passed by and noticed Donovan stepping out. Everything okay? Rick asked. Donovan adjusted his cap and replied, Better than it was. Rick smiled warmly. You should tell her we are all rooting for her. Donovan paused. Maybe you should tell her yourself, he said. That suggestion lingered in Rick's mind throughout the day. Yet before the week ended, someone at the garage would seize that idea and develop it into something bigger. Friday arrived quickly. The temperature in Tempe was already rising above 95 degrees by noon, and the shop's fans were little help, merely circulating the sweat. Despite this, there was a new kind of energy in the atmosphere. Calm, steady, as if the shop had finally released a breath it did not realize it was holding. Around 2 in the afternoon, Rick stepped outside holding a box. It was simple and unadorned, nothing extravagant. Inside lay a framed picture taken from the garage's security camera. Julia was there, arms deep inside the Ferrari's engine compartment, wearing that intense, laser-focused expression. Underneath, a plaque read, "The Day We Learned Again." Rick carried it into the break room and hung it on the wall just above the broken coffee machine that had never been fixed. A few of the guys who had been there on Saturday gathered around it. Rick asked Reese, who nodded in agreement. We're not letting that moment fade. Victor then entered, staring at the photo for a long moment. She didn't even realize we had been watching her like that, he observed. Reese replied, That's exactly what made it so real. At her home, Julia sat cross-legged on the garage floor with a half-assembled motorbike resting between her knees. The heat didn't bother her at all. She was accustomed to it. She enjoyed the sound of tools clinking, the dirt under her fingernails, and the way the engine seemed to communicate its needs if you listened carefully. Donovan came out carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Figured you might want something cold, he said. Thanks, she replied, wiping the sweat from her forehead as he handed her the glass before leaning against the tool chest. He added, Travis said you're one sharp individual. She laughed softly. Doesn't change how he treated people. Donovan nodded. True, but it means he's thinking about it. That's progress. Julia took a sip from her drink, and then placed it down next to a box of spark plugs. Do you think they will remember me? She wondered aloud. I believe they will remember what you showed them, and that there is still so much more to discover. The answer lay between them, heavy and undeniable. A few days later, Rick arrived at their home without any warning. He appeared in his worn-out Silverado, carrying a manila envelope tucked under one arm. Donovan opened the door and said, Well, look who it is. Just wanted to drop something off. Rick replied, It will only take a moment. Julia came to the doorway, her hands still greasy from working on a rebuild. This is for you, Rick said, handing her the envelope. When Julia opened it, she found a certificate printed on thick paper, with the Trask Automotive logo faintly visible in the background. At the top, it read Honorary Lead Technician, Julia Martin. Below, in a sharp black font, it acknowledged her technical expertise, leadership under pressure, and reminded everyone why they first started turning wrenches. Her eyes slowly traced the words. She spoke little and simply said, "Thank you." Rick scratched his chin and said, "Most people spend years trying to earn something like this." "I wasn't trying to earn anything," she answered. "I know," he said. "That is why it matters." They stood there quietly for a while. Then she said, "You didn't have to do this." Rick looked her straight in the eyes and said, "We did." After he left, Julia pinned the certificate on the corkboard in her room, placing it right above her MIT letter and beside her first spark plug rebuild tag from 3 years ago. Not because she sought approval, but because it reminded her that transformation is possible. Even in places where it was never expected, change began to take root. She never returned to Trask Automotive because she no longer needed to. What unfolded there had already made its impact. The guys in that workshop started asking more questions, paying closer attention, and taking a moment before speaking down to the next kid who appeared different, thought differently, or carried their own tools. And Trask stopped pretending to have all the answers. Within 2 months, he hired his first female apprentice, not for the sake of publicity, but because nobody dismissed the idea anymore. They were prepared. As for Julia, she continued assembling engines and machines, crafting her future piece by piece, wire by wire. When someone challenges you to prove yourself, you face 2 options: retreat or show them who you truly are. That day she did not prove herself. She revealed her true identity. If this story struck a chord with you, or changed your perception of what talent looks like, make sure to subscribe. More stories like this are on the way, and maybe one day, one of them will be yours.